All right, let's bring in John Rothman because I want to hear his opinion on all these things here on the Mark Thompson Show. Welcome, John Rothman. Hey.
I am delighted to be here. How are you?
I'm good. John Rothman, of course, our former KGO talk show host, our political analyst, and our presidential historian. Welcome to the Mark Thompson Show, and I'm glad to have you along for it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That
So,
ovation is for you, Kim.
oh, yeah, no, I think that's definitely for you. So, did you hear we were talking about the gun thing in Tennessee in the schools? What are your thoughts on this?
Look, it's a battle in this country over culture. We're not only dealing with guns, we're dealing with the right of women to choose, and the lines are clearly drawn. The Republican Party is taking a position which says, yes, everybody should be able to have a gun, women should not have the right to choose, and you can go down the line on these issues. So
Yeah.
it's a partisan question now, which disappoints me. I listened this morning to your commentary on what's going on. I don't want a gun in my kid's school.
Hmm.
And look, we have even a debate here in San Francisco. Police are not allowed on school campuses. Well, what happens if there's a crisis and you need a police officer? So there's a whole cultural attitude now. But I don't believe that by providing guns to teachers or to others on a high school campus or a younger kid's campus, it does anything for safety at all. First of all, you're in your own story talked about, do you lock them? Do you unlock them only when the crisis takes place?
Right.
Do you have time when the crisis takes place? What happens if a kid is looking for something and picks up the gun? I mean, there are a whole host of issues involved, but this has become such a partisan issue with Republicans.
Right.
And there is another question: personal freedom. So, okay, if a Republican says you should have the right to carry a gun in school, I say a woman should have the right to terminate a pregnancy if she chooses to in her doctor's office or in a hospital. Where does individual choice stop when it comes to the Republicans? So, I would suggest to you this is going to be very controversial. And given Donald Trump's stands on these issues versus where Joe Biden stands on these issues, it'll be a clear demarcation for voters on November 5th.
Well, let's talk. You mentioned the abortion issue, and let's dig into that because the Supreme Court is going to hear arguments regarding this abortion case out of Idaho.
But it's not an abortion case. It's very interesting to me. It's called abortion, but really
Hmm.
it's safety, women's safety. What
Yeah.
happens if something happens and a pregnancy has to be terminated? That's not an abortion. That's not a woman seeking an abortion. If you're a woman and you have a health problem and you go into the hospital, you expect it to be addressed. Whether you want to carry a child or not is not the issue here. Are women entitled to have proper care? That's the question.
And that's really what it is about because it's about emergency room care, right? So, what happens when a woman goes into an emergency room, usually probably already miscarrying or having some trouble that like an ectopic pregnancy that where the fallopian tube could rupture and her life is at risk, that chance of death is high, and they can't do anything.
But
They
you see,
can't give
that's the
her
whole point.
mifepristone. They can't do anything like this. And so this is the case they're hearing, correct?
Yep, and that's the
Yeah.
whole point. There shouldn't be an issue for debate or
Hmm.
discussion. If you are in a situation medically where you need treatment, you ought to get the treatment.
Right.
And let me tell you, if the Supreme Court must separate this from the question of a woman's right to choose, because this has purely to do with emergency health care.
Right.
And I don't think any court in the land should be able to stop a doctor from taking care of a person who is having a health problem. I just don't think that's the right way to do it.
Let's go down this garden path. What happens if, theoretically, they say, okay, well, in the case of emergency, then women have the right to have all these treatments that maybe are against the law in the state, but if it's an emergency, it's an emergency.
It
And so,
shouldn't be against the law in a state. That's the
but
whole point.
then do emergency rooms turn into reproductive health care clinics? Then is the emergency room the only place where you can go to get such a procedure done? Is that where they might, go down the road with that
They
in the
could go
thinking?
anywhere
Yeah.
because their whole goal is to prevent a woman from controlling her own body.
Hmm.
I mean, there's no logic to it. It's a hard political stand, just like on the issue of guns. They want the absolute right to carry a gun, no matter where they are,
Yeah.
and they want the absolute right to tell a woman what can or cannot be done with her body, pure and simple. So, if you are a true libertarian, if you are a true conservative, if you believe that the government that governs best governs least, well, a woman should have the right to do whatever she damn well pleases to do with her body. And I might
Mm-hmm.
point out, if they tried to pass a law telling me what I could do with my body, I'll tell you what I would tell them to do, except I can't do it on the airwaves.
I'm looking at the chat. Heather writing, any pregnancy would be an emergency for me because I would rather be dead than pregnant. I mean, I think it would have to constitute a medical emergency,
But it
you know.
shouldn't have to.
Well,
That's what I'm so upset about.
you're preaching to the choir. I mean, clearly, I don't
Yeah.
think there should be any restriction on abortion at all.
Well,
Yeah.
the question is not whether there should be a restriction. The question is whether a physician and a patient
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to take care of the
Yeah.
patient's body, pure and simple, male or female.
I
So,
think. Go ahead. I'm
no, I
sorry.
was just going to say, so
Yeah.
what I hope now, there are two swing votes on the court right now. The Chief Justice evidently is one, and Amy Coney Barrett is the other.
Mm-hmm.
But even if they were to vote on this, it would still be a split decision. I look,
Yeah.
I'm appalled at the state of individual liberty. I am in favor of a restoration of Roe v. Wade. I am in favor of a woman who wants in vitro fertilization being able to have in vitro fertilization.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question of whether an embryo is a human being is the silliest darn thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yes.
But you and I agree on these issues. But the problem is there are states in this union that don't agree. Now, let me offer you this suggestion. In 1858, when Lincoln and Douglas debated over the question of slavery, the whole question was popular sovereignty. Should each state have the right to determine for itself whether they should be slave or free? Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. A nation cannot exist half slave and half free. The problem is the Republicans are embracing Stephen Douglas, not Abraham Lincoln. They're embracing the idea that each state should decide for itself. Well, I have to tell you something. There are certain things where states shouldn't decide for themselves. Let me give you an example. Let's assume for a minute that we could turn back the clock to before you were born. I was alive, you weren't. But let's go back to 1954 and Brown versus the Board of Education. What if the Supreme Court had said, well, each state can decide for itself whether they want to keep the Jim Crow laws? No, what they did is they struck it all down.
Mm-hmm.
And they did so because America has certain principles. And so my suggestion is that what the Republican Party has become is a party of states' rights rather than a national party. And remember, the Republican Party was founded to be a national party. And I would even go so far as to say if Abraham Lincoln were alive today, he'd be a Democrat, not a Republican.
Let's move to the story about protesters on the Golden Gate Bridge. The blockage of roadways, critical roadways around, specifically around the Bay Area, but this would be around the state of California. There's a lawmaker in California who wants to double the fines for protesters who block highways. This is in the state assembly, and it did pass out of the Assembly Transportation Committee on Monday. It's sponsored by Republican Assembly member Kate Sanchez, who says it's a step in the right direction to send a signal that these dangerous highway blockings will no longer be tolerated. She said enough is enough when it comes to this. The fines, if it's passed, would be more costly with each subsequent violation. So it looks like the penalties would be raised anywhere between 200 and 1,000. But if you're a repeat violator, if you protest over and over again and block the roadway, your fines could go as high as $4,100 added to your infraction. Do you think that's going to keep people from doing this?
No, of course not. The point is that now these kinds of protests, their whole goal is to block traffic, to obstruct what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm opposed to it. If you want to have a demonstration, let me give you an example, because the Middle East is what comes to mind. While these protesters were blocking the Golden Gate Bridge, the Jewish community and the pro Israel community held a rally in Yerba Buena Gardens. They didn't block any roads, they didn't block any streets. They said what they had to say, and they got great press coverage. And they didn't interfere in the fact that people would have the right to transit. Uh, I think when you protest, you have to do so responsibly. And what they are doing, these protesters, is irresponsible. I think you're seeing that on college campuses across America now, where people's lives are being threatened when theoretically you're protesting for peace. In fact, I really wonder if you look at all these tent cities being established all over the place, who's paying for all the tents? The protesters aren't. That's for darn sure. I really believe in the right of peaceful protest, but I also believe that there are limits in terms of other people's individual liberty. Back in the days of the student strike back in 1970, I was at Whittier College, and the students were on strike. They wanted to protest the right to oppose the Vietnam War. And a group of us who were members of the Student Senate gathered together and said, yes, we believe you have a right to strike if you choose to, but students have a right not to strike. And therefore, we have to have an equal hand on this. So if you choose not to go to class, that's your choice. But if I choose to go to class, that's my choice.
Mm-hmm.
My feeling about, and I hadn't thought of this in years, but it was a major article that I wrote in The Rock, which was the Whittier College alumni magazine, on this very issue. I think that if you want to protest, you have a right to, but you don't have the right to obstruct other people in their ability. What happens on the bridge if there's an emergency? And you've seen ambulances going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by gum, you have to have that. And I think students on a campus, not every student favors one protest or another protest. They should have the right to go to school. Look what happened to Columbia University. They're closing the gates.
Yeah.
They're telling people it's not safe to come on campus so you can do your classwork remotely. Well, this is not the America I grew up in.
Till the end of
It's
the
an
semester.
American choice.
Yeah. There are some that say, listen, these protests are largely peaceful, and they point to the civil rights era.
No, they're not peaceful. I'm sorry. When you threaten people's lives, when you shut down a university for the purpose of advocating for something, that's not peaceful. And I can tell you, I deal with the Jewish students around the country on a regular basis. They don't consider it peaceful. They're threatened. One of the rabbis at one of the leading universities in America, at Columbia, said, don't come back from Passover. Stay home. It's not safe on the campus. Well, let me tell you something. If you're not safe on a campus, would you send your kids to a school where they weren't safe? Of course not.
No.
Same thing applies for big kids at universities.
Sure.
They want to protest. There should be a designated place where you can go to protest, where you can have as many people as you want to protest, but you don't close it. Look, in England, have you ever been to the free speech corner? Well, you can stand up and say anything you darn well please, but people still have the right to use the park. And I think that is the key here. And by the way, I listened the other day to someone because, you know, the expression used is from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And the reporter asked one of the demonstrators, what is the river? What is the sea? And the protester had absolutely no idea what the river was, the Jordan River, the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. They still have a right to protest, even if they don't know what they're doing and don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But not to obstruct the right of students to go to campus, to go to school. And I feel the same way about the Golden Gate Bridge, which, by the way, is a public space, but a space that is controlled because it has to be safe. You know.
But what do you say to the protesters of the civil rights era that said, listen, if you can't block something, if you can't make people feel it, then it's just going to be people standing off to the side and no one's going to pay any attention. That you have to somehow have some impact or make some statement. And this often has to do with a road closure or a building closure, blocking yourself inside of a building.
No, you know what they did in Montgomery, Alabama?
Yeah.
They had a bus boycott. That's how Martin Luther King Jr. came to the forefront. There was a bus boycott. So if you really feel that strongly, you can have a boycott of something. You can, look, we have the people now who are demanding boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel.
Hmm.
Uh, they want to do that. That's fine. They don't want to buy an Israeli product. Be my guest. But is it right for them to demand, as is happening now at the University of California at Berkeley, divestment of Berkeley from anything involving Israel?
Yeah.
My goodness. So, if they really want to carry to an extreme, don't use anything created in Israel or Israeli products. There's a whole list, you can Google it, of products created in Israel that we use every single day, but we use them. And look, what really bothers me is the hypocrisy. Uh, Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
They are committed, unfortunately, not only to the destruction of Israel, but killing Israelis and killing Jews. They don't make any bones about it. Where's the condemnation of a terrorist group? You want to condemn Israel for its policies. Heck, you can do that by going to Israel. The Israelis, read the Israeli press. They're full of condemnation. You don't like Benjamin Netanyahu? Fine. You don't have to vote for him. Okay. But the idea that exists now that Israel should cease to exist, which is basically what their principle is just,
Right.
it's obscene. There is only one nation in the world, Kim, in which people are calling for them not to exist as a nation. That's Israel. That's politicide. And
Well,
that's something that really disturbs me. So I'm in favor of the right to protest.
yeah.
I believe in the right to protest. I have been in many protests in my life, but do it responsibly
Yeah.
and do it in a way like the Montgomery bus boycott, where you make your point, but you're not encumbering other people.
Yeah.
I have a friend who got stuck on the Golden Gate Bridge. It was no fun, I can tell you that.
Yeah, I agree with that. If it was me that was getting stuck in the backup, I wouldn't be pleased. But I do understand the notion that whatever we're going through isn't as bad as bombs falling, isn't as bad as death, isn't as bad as starvation, isn't as bad as the point they're trying to make of what these people in this Gaza
Yes, but they
area are
aren't
going through.
protesting the fact
Yeah.
that innocent Jews were killed.
Well,
They're
no,
not
I mean,
protesting the
I think
fact
now it's
that
about the overreaction, right? It's
no,
about
but
the.
no. It's a
Do you?
question
I
of the right
mean,
of Israel to exist.
would you
The
agree that there's been, that enough is enough now?
No, people should continue to protest, but their right to protest should not infringe upon my ability to give a lecture or go to school. Look what happened
Right.
in Berkeley at Zellerbach Auditorium. An Israeli veteran was speaking. He was disrupted. Oh, the doors and windows to the building were smashed. That's not protest.
Yeah.
That's not legitimate in my mind. Let me tell you, I've spoken on enough college and university campuses. If people want to protest, let them come in and argue with me, for God's sake. That's what a protest
When
is.
I say enough is enough now, I mean the bombing to smithereens of the Gaza area. It just seems like those people have been through enough.
Oh, they have. And let me tell you, that's why people should be protesting Hamas.
Mhm.
The reason they are in this position is because of Hamas. Hamas came into Israel. Nobody mentions it now. Uh, October 7th is a long time ago. Not really, just 6 months and a little few weeks. They came in and slaughtered people. They raped people.
Yeah.
They well, I don't need to describe the horror of it. Where's the outrage? How come there wasn't a protest about that? And let me assure you of one thing: if that had happened in the United States of America, if people had come across the Mexican border or the Canadian border and done it to us, what do you think we would have done? We would have retaliated with full force. So, and I'm talking about the United States of America. It doesn't justify violence. I'm not going to justify violence. I'm not going to justify war. I'm not going to justify any of that. But I am going to say, if someone says they're going to come and kill you, what do you do? If someone said they were coming to kill your children, Kim, what would you do?
I would try to defend myself.
And more than that, you try to defend your children. And that's what the Israelis are trying to do. They're trying to defend themselves. And the problem is Hamas embeds themselves, uses human shields, uses United Nations agencies, including UNRWA, and it doesn't excuse. I'm not making an excuse for the Israelis. You want to hear hand wringing and regret? You go to Israel. People there are horrified, but they also understand that if they don't strike back, it will happen again and again and again. And what does Hamas say? They would like to repeat this every single day if they could. And what are they talking about? They're talking about killing Israelis and they're talking about killing Jews. Why do you think there's such tight security on Jewish centers and synagogues here in the United States and in Europe? because they're going after Jews because they're Jews. We don't stand for that kind of thing. We shouldn't. And I must say that the good news is that Joe Biden made a statement from the White House on the eve of Passover saying there's no room in this country for this kind of protest. You want to object to something, you can do it, and I think that's completely legitimate. Listen, if I were advising the Palestinians, I'd say get the biggest venue you can, uh, take a stadium, whether for the 49ers or the Giants, and pack it with thousands of people and have a legitimate protest. You don't think that wouldn't be heard around the world? Blocking a road? Well, I tell you, I just think that's wrong. And I think that what the model should be is the Montgomery bus boycott,
Yeah.
where no roads were blocked. People simply stopped using the transit.
All
Uh,
right, let's move to funding for Ukraine, which has passed this $95 billion package sending aid to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan. After months of delay, finally done. The Democrats and some Republicans had to work together on this, kind of going against what Trump had wanted. And so I've been reading a couple articles I saw that the passage of this may signal, because President Biden wanted this, right? May signal that there's cracks in Trumpville, that, what he's losing a little bit of control of this faction of his party.
well, we know that, and let me tell you, who did the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell blame for the Ukraine situation? Tucker Carlson. He said Tucker Carlson has poisoned the minds of people against Zelensky and Ukraine.
Hmm.
The Republican Party is having an internal battle between isolationism, which is represented by Donald Trump and his forces, and the Reagan Republicans who favored intervention. Do you remember President Reagan saying, tear down that wall?
Hmm.
I interviewed the guy who wrote that line for Reagan, and it was a controversial line at the time, but Reagan overruled some of his speechwriters and his advisors and put it in. Look, to me, it's a very simple matter, and that is that the United States stands for freedom. It stands for liberty. It stands for the right of the Ukrainians to fight back. But you remember what Winston Churchill said on the eve of World War II? Give us the tools. We'll finish the job. They're not asking for American troops. They're asking for American money and support. And let me tell you, and I believe this to be true, the Europeans are watching us carefully. One of the great debates in this campaign will be the question of Donald Trump, who favors withdrawal from NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The Europeans are horrified. That would mean that there would be no check on Russia at all. And so the other great question, you tell me if you have to do a news break. I don't want
No,
to
no, go ahead.
disrupt you.
I was actually just going to ask you about what a second Trump administration would mean for Europe, because I was reading this article in Politico last night that said it would tear Europe apart.
Oh, the Europeans will be horrified. It would be a disaster. But the more immediate question is Speaker Johnson. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is a very conservative Republican. He's an election denier. He's a Trump supporter. He says that the reason he changed his mind on Ukraine aid is because he gets all the facts. As Speaker of the House, you receive the highest security clearance, and you really are able to understand what's going on. Uh, Speaker Johnson may have sacrificed his ability to continue as Speaker. We don't know yet what the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Paul Gosars, one or two other of these Republicans will do. You know who's going to save Speaker Johnson if he's saved? The Democrats. The Democrats will save him. And then he will be viewed by the conservative Republicans as even more of a traitor. Well, look, the days of bipartisan politics, when it comes to foreign policy, need to be restored. And one of the most important actions, and Joe Biden deserves great credit for it, but so does Speaker Johnson, and I'm not a great fan of Speaker Johnson, is this. And how will Europe react to a second Trump presidency? They've already made clear, except for the totalitarian leaders like the president of Hungary, who would love to see Trump come back. And I think Vladimir Putin would love to see Trump come back because, well, that tells you what side are we on. I think we need to be on the side of people fighting for democracy, for freedom. That's the reason why the bill passed. It's aid for Ukraine, which Ukraine needs to survive as a nation. It's aid for Israel, which Israel needs desperately when its security is threatened, and for Taiwan. If we were not standing strong with Taiwan, do you think the Chinese would hesitate to march into Formosa and take that island nation? Of course they wouldn't. We're the buffer that protects the world. There are some who say we shouldn't be. They want isolationism. We learned on the eve of World War II what isolationism can mean. And so I think we have to not do that for sure.
Right. All right, let's move to the special U.S. envoy to Gaza. So now we're getting a person who is headed to Gaza that will only be dealing with this situation and America's response to it. The president is tapping apparently someone named Lisa Grande of the United States Institute of Peace to replace David Satterfield as this new special envoy for Gaza.
No problem with having an envoy for Gaza. I think that's a very good idea. Whether that person will accomplish anything depends on who controls Gaza. One of the things we have to know is the United States and Israel are committed to the principle that Hamas should not control Gaza. So let's
Mhm.
assume Hamas is displaced. Who runs Gaza? The Egyptians won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. There's talk of a united Arab command. They don't want that either. So Gaza is sort of left adrift. One of the tragedies in all of this is that when Israel withdrew from Gaza in the 19, and rather in 2005, 2006, people of Gaza had the ability to create their own structure, their own ability to work with the Palestinian Authority. Hamas did not allow that to take place. And so now it's a real question. When this war is over, and it will end, who will govern Gaza? You know, the Egyptians controlled Gaza from 1948 to 1967. And I was in Gaza during those days. And I can tell you that it's a tragedy. Nobody wants control of Gaza. And the mistake, I believe, that was made is that when Sharon withdrew from Gaza, took all the Israeli settlers and settlements out of Gaza, that was the chance. Gaza could have been the Riviera of the Middle East, but Hamas wouldn't permit it. Just want to remind everybody what Sharon said at the time was that prove to us by maintaining stability in Gaza, by building the ports and building the airport and having it become the Riviera of the Middle East, prove to us that you can live in peace and anything is possible. And Gaza and Hamas chose the exact opposite path, and they are now paying the consequences. And the children and the people who live in Gaza are paying the consequences, not of Israeli action, but of their own design, what Hamas has done. May I just point quickly one thing out? We still
Please.
talk about a two-state solution, which many of us have favored over many, many years. Hamas doesn't talk about a two-state solution. It
Mhm.
wants a one-state solution. And that means there's no room for Israel. And all you have to do is listen to some of these demonstrators here in the United States who are saying justice for Palestine means the elimination of Israel. And you understand the Israelis are not going to roll over and play dead, nor should they.
Right.
I mean, it's tragic. This all could have been avoided. But when you're dealing with radical Islam and a feeling which the Palestinians have had of great injustice done to them, they are determined to fight back. When the Oslo Accords were signed, I supported the Oslo Accords, not necessarily because I thought they would work, but because if Arafat was willing to sign off on the Oslo Accords, I thought maybe there was a chance. But you know why Arafat agreed to that? Because he was afraid of Hamas. Hamas hated Arafat as much as they hated the Israelis. So, what do they say? Politics makes strange bedfellows. And
Yeah.
that is the situation.
Well, and I look at this situation and I see, now the tradings of missiles between Israel and Iran. So other countries involved, and it looks to me like this is growing, and
Oh, it
it's
is.
very concerning.
You understand the Iranian goal is the destruction of Israel. They say they want to wipe Israel off the map. Their leadership is committed to the wiping of Israel off the map. That's why Israel has been so committed to preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon. Uh, we talked about that a lot on KGO. the idea that if Iran had a nuclear weapon, they said they would use it
Yeah.
against the Israelis. The Israelis said, then you'll never have a nuclear weapon. We'll do anything to stop you. And Israel has. And thankfully, the United States and the Europeans have supported Israel in that situation. Look, the worst case scenario, if Hamas and their people were to win, is that all the Jews of Israel would be slaughtered. Jews around the world would be less secure. And I'm not exaggerating. Just read what they say, listen to what they say, listen to the protesters at Columbia University, listen to them at Yale. That's what they're saying at UC Berkeley. And it's not new, Kim. This has been going on for years and years and years. Uh, and so this is the nub of the matter. And it'll be interesting to see what I'm waiting for, and I think you will be, and we'll be covering it extensively, I'm sure, is what happens at the Democratic National Convention. Because there are already calls for mass protests at the Democratic National Convention
Yeah.
against Israel. Well, wait a minute. Why aren't there mass demonstrations against Hamas and its brutality? Why aren't there mass demonstrations which say, let's find a solution to the problem? Why aren't there mass demonstrations, if you will, calling for two states for two people? They aren't. They're only focused on the destruction of Israel. And that is a serious problem because the Israelis are not going to roll over and play dead for anybody.
I guess I see it differently, where I look at it as you ask the question, why aren't there protests against Hamas? Because October 7th happened, it was awful, and that's when there should have been protests. But since then, now we have this ongoing
Why
action.
weren't there, Kim?
But
Why weren't there
but the
protests against
protests
Hamas?
now are calling for the ceasefire on the ongoing
No,
action,
no, no.
right?
They're calling for
So
the destruction of Israel.
okay.
They're
Yeah.
not, listen to what they're saying.
Yeah.
Don't listen to me. Listen, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What's in the middle of the river and the sea? Israel. The whole point is, sure, I'm in favor of a ceasefire, but do you want a ceasefire where Hamas rebuilds itself, where Hamas takes over the West Bank, where there is continued struggle and more people die? And I speak of Jews and Israelis as well. And the answer is no. I don't have an answer, but anybody who ignores what Hamas's absolute goal is. Did you hear the protesters at Columbia shouting, "We are all Hamas"?
No, I didn't.
Well, that's the slogan.
Yeah.
We are all Hamas. What does that tell you? No wonder Jewish students are
Are
afraid
afraid.
at
That's
Columbia
true.
University.
Completely true. But I think more people, and I could be wrong, but I think more people look at it as we just want people to stop. We want the humanitarian crisis to stop. We want people to have food. We want people to stop being,
I agree.
bombed
I
on
agree.
both sides. So,
But you see, in order to do it, it takes two to tango. Hamas would have to agree. You want everything to stop? All you have to do is Hamas releases the hostages.
mhm.
Nobody's talking about the 133 hostages that we think are still alive. 133 hostages still alive, more than 6 months after that attack. Where have you heard the United Nations issue a call condemning Hamas? No. Have you heard the United Nations issue a statement calling for the release of the hostages? No. I mean, the Israelis are caught on the horns of a dilemma. If they don't hit Hamas on a regular basis, if they don't destabilize it, and you talk about Iran, look, when look what Iran did. They sent their missiles in. Thank God the United States, Israel, and the Europeans and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan worked together to prevent any damage being done. When the Israelis hit back at Iran, they were very strategic in what they did. All they were doing was sending a message. We can do you great damage. We're not. Stop what you're doing. Stop this insanity. And the Iranians understood the message, and that's why they didn't go for broke. That's why Hezbollah in Lebanon has not fired 150,000 rockets into Israel. You want to see chaos and disaster?
No.
Well, that's what will happen if Hezbollah is let loose. So, but there are two things, if we can. I know you want to move on to other subjects, but I want to just conclude this by saying there are two issues here. One is peace in the Middle East. The other is peace for Jews around the world. I mean, I can't begin to describe to people the fear that permeates the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is take a look at the security now around synagogues and Jewish community centers and Jews on college campuses who are afraid for their lives in the United States of America, for heaven's sake. So I think this is something people have to consider carefully. Palestinians have rights, but not at the expense of Israel's right to exist.
Let's move back to domestic politics because I think in this upcoming election, we're going to hear a lot about the economy. We already have been, right? The price of everything has increased. Uh, the Republicans will say, well, if it was Trump, the gas prices would be lower, the price of bread and eggs would be lower. Uh, but now, and I don't know if this type of thing is celebrated enough, under a new rule that President Biden has developed, 4 million more workers could be eligible for overtime pay.
Yes.
So this is uh, a federal rule that's expanding overtime protections to millions of workers that are now excluded under current law. It's been finalized. The Labor Department's regulation would ensure that salaried workers who earn less than $58,000 a year would be automatically entitled to overtime when they work more than 40 hours a week starting in 2025. That's a big deal for a lot of people. I mean, the estimate is what, 4 million workers in the United States would be eligible to receive overtime pay.
Yeah. Well, tell that to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
If people want these benefits, the Democrats provide it. The Republicans
Right.
wouldn't even think of it. And I think that also is a key. Uh, you're absolutely right, Kim. And by the way, you know what that gets to, in addition to the Republicans have another decision they have to make, and that is who will Donald Trump's running mate be for vice president?
Mm,
And we're going to be talking a lot about that in the future. But these, primarily, the people being considered, have all said that what Trump contends, that he won the election of 2020, is correct. And you and I know that did not happen. But to convince these people and who he chooses as vice president will be critical. So that's another question. And we haven't even touched on, I know you're going to talk about the Trump trial
yeah.
coming on, but let me just quickly add, I don't know how much time we have, but I want to be very clear about this. The most important single question will be the Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity.
They're hearing arguments what today or tomorrow.
They heard them the other
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
We're hearing them ongoing. But I have to tell you, I worked for Richard Nixon. I know that Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon because the last thing Jerry Ford wanted was Nixon to go on trial. When he issued the pardon, it was for anything that Richard Nixon may have done during his time as president of the United States. And I have to tell you bluntly, that's the question now we're dealing with Donald Trump. Should he be able to escape prosecution simply because he was president? If the Supreme Court follows precedent, they will, in fact, say clearly, no one is above the law. And I don't believe that Donald Trump should be extended immunity. If he is extended immunity, it would be a tremendous blow to American justice and the legal process. So I hope that the Supreme Court uses the Nixon precedent that no president is above the law if we're involved in a criminal matter.
He posted recently in the last few days regarding this immunity. Trump posted on his Truth Social that it doesn't matter how badly a president crosses the line, even if it's be a murdering someone, a blatant, crime, that it doesn't matter as long as you're a sitting president. It doesn't matter what you do, no
And it's
matter
rubbish.
how much over the line you go.
It's terrible.
You should not be. I mean, you should
And I
not
hope
have
the
to face
Supreme
any
Court-
consequence.
The Supreme Court should reject that unanimously.
Yeah.
By the way, if Nixon had taken that line, my God, can you imagine the turmoil in this country? Richard Nixon accepted a presidential pardon because he didn't want to go to jail, pure and simple. And I think we have to apply the same standard we did to Richard Nixon as we now deal with Donald Trump, pure and simple.
Well, there's a difference, though, between being issued a pardon, right? A blanket pardon, versus just assuming that even if you don't get the pardon, that you're somehow immune to everything.
Absolutely.
That somehow, your station in life means that you're above everyone else and you don't have to face any consequences or ever face the music.
Thank you, Kim. Would you please address that to the Supreme Court? And we'll see. Look, there are two justices on the court who were problematic, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito.
Yeah.
I think all the other justices understand this very clearly. but it may be a decision with 2 dissenters. If there were more dissenters, I'd be very, very surprised. Trump is going to lose this one, and when he does, and it will come in June before the court adjourns for the summer, I think it'll be a tremendous blow to Donald Trump.
Well, if he doesn't lose it, if the Supreme Court actually backs him on this, I think I will lose even more faith. I already lost faith after they overturned Roe v. Wade. But if this actually is upheld, I mean, it'll have to be a hell of an argument. I can't imagine what they would say to defend that.
May I make a prediction to you? If the Supreme Court upheld Donald Trump's immunity, I think not only would Donald Trump lose the election in a landslide,
Right.
but the country's outrage would be so great. I have some faith in Chief Justice Roberts, who I think has turned to the court and said, look, we can't afford to uphold this. We just can't do that. Imagine what it would do to America. So I remind people, go back and read the United States versus Richard Nixon. It was a very clear decision. The president does have immunity in many cases, but not if it's involving a crime. And what Donald Trump is accused of is criminal. I'm not even going to talk about what's happening in New York today, the scandalous stuff. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But by the way, you can't impeach a president or remove a president for scandal. We learned that with Bill Clinton. But what you have to do is to think carefully about a president who views himself as being above the law. Richard Nixon, and you can Google it and get it, made a statement to David Frost in the Frost interviews in 1977 that if a president does it, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that is the most absurd statement anybody could ever make.
Lori says SCOTUS should do a lot of things. It will not be unanimous. At least Thomas will abstain, if not vote for immunity, she thinks.
Yeah, well, I think Thomas and Alito are both highly problematic.
Yeah,
highly problematic. And you know something? I know we have so many issues to talk about, so many things that bother us and disturb us. But can you imagine if the Supreme Court of the United States were to formally declare that a former president or a sitting president is above the law? I mean, it's unthinkable.
No.
So we'll see.
John Rothmann, thank you for being here on the Mark Thompson Show.
You mean that's all the time we have?
That's it. That's all we got, my friend.
All I want you to know is I love Kim McAllister.
Oh,
and I want all of you to be aware that in order to maintain the Mark Thompson program, you have to support the Mark Thompson program. Can we get the little liner underneath there?
We'll do it right now.
How you contribute.
Since you're going to do the spiel, I'll let you go for it.
So these programs that Mark and Kim and Albert do, they're not free per se, because they have to be paid, and we have to be supportive of what they're doing. And I really am horrified that there is no talk radio in San Francisco anymore. In order to maintain any sense of our ability to dialogue and talk, even if you disagree with me, for God's sake, you can email me. You can tell me. By the way, you can hear me every day on Around the Political World with John Rothmann.
That's
right.
It's
only 10 minutes, Monday through Friday. And we have a new system up. It's called, listen carefully, The Voice of San Francisco. But you can get it by going to The Voice of SF, all small letters, The Voice of SF. And I do a commentary every day on local San Francisco and California affairs. So we have 2 vehicles now, and the important thing is that we have the ability to express ourselves in a peaceful, positive fashion. And all I can say is to Mark Thompson and Kim McAllister and Albert, thank you for everything you do every day, and we all want to support you.
Thank you. Thanks, John Rothmann. Have a great rest of your day.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.